In the flickering gaslight of Victorian London, a wealthy gentleman reaches into his pocket and pulls out a book, bound not in leather, but in the skin of an executed murderer. A doctor examines a medical specimen preserved on parchment made from a pauper's flayed flesh. A grieving mother wears gloves stitched from her deceased child's epidermis. This was the bizarre reality of 19th century Britain, where human skin became a commodity, used for books, clothing, and even art. Why did an era obsessed with morality and progress embrace such macabre relics? And whose bodies paid the price? The gallows of Victorian England did more than deliver justice. They supplied raw materials for one of history's most macabre trades. When William Corder, the notorious Red Barn murderer, dropped through the trapdoor at Bury St Edmunds in 1828, the attending surgeon didn't merely certify his death. With practiced precision, he flayed the corpse, treating the skin like fine vellum to be stitched into the cover of Corder's own confession. This wasn't an isolated act of post-mortem humiliation, but part of a widespread practice where the bodies of executed criminals became morbid collectibles, a tradition stretching back to the 17th century, but perfected by Victorian morality. The process was chillingly systematic. After particularly infamous executions, surgeons would often collaborate with booksellers to create what advertisements called morality bindings. The skin was typically taken from the back or thighs, areas less damaged by the noose, then treated with alum and tannins in a month-long curing process. The resulting leather had a distinctive pebbled texture and yellowish hue, described in an 1843 auction catalogue as having the appearance of old Spanish cordovan, though with a peculiar aroma when warmed by the hand. These volumes weren't hidden away as private curios, but prominently displayed. The Norwich Free Library's 1851 visitor log notes that their skin-bound copy of murderer James Rush's trial transcript was the most handled book in the collection, the binding polished smooth by morbid fingers. What began as judicial theatre soon became commercial enterprise. By the 1840s, a network of executioners, surgeons, and bookbinders had established a grisly supply chain. The Newgate Calendar, a popular chronicle of crimes, lists payments made to hangmen for prime cuts of particularly notorious felons. The skin of child murderer Frederick Baker fetched 3 sterlings in 1867, equivalent to £400 today, while the epidermis of poisoner Mary Ann Cotton commanded 5 British sterlings due to its unusual fineness and lack of blemish. Yet this trade revealed uncomfortable truths about Victorian society. The same middle-class gentlemen who clucked over newspaper accounts of the criminal classes would eagerly pay premiums for relics made from their bodies. A surviving ledger from London bookseller James Toller shows that his anthropodermic volumes consistently outsold conventional leather bindings by 3 to 1 between 1830 and 1860. Even more disturbing was the pseudoscientific belief that contact with a criminal's skin could transfer their wickedness, a superstition exploited by spiritualists who sold murderers' skin amulets as protective charms. The practice reached its grotesque zenith with the Burke and Hare case, after William Burke's 1829 execution for supplying murder victims to Edinburgh's medical schools. His skin was tanned into a pocketbook, now held at Surgeons' Hall Museum. Contemporary accounts describe students queuing to touch it, believing it would confer surgical skill. A macabre joke circulated that Hare, who turned King's evidence, was the only criminal of the age to escape with his hide intact. Modern forensic analysis reveals the disturbing scale of this trade. Multispectral imaging of 19th century bookbindings has identified at least 47 confirmed anthropodermic volumes in UK collections, with another 200 suspected. The British Library's conservation team recently discovered that what was catalogued as fine pigskin on an 1835 edition of Dante's Inferno actually matches human DNA, a revelation that's forcing institutions to confront uncomfortable chapters in their collecting histories. Why did this practice flourish? Part judicial theatre, part morbid curiosity, it reflected the Victorian obsession with physical reminders of mortality, but taken to grotesque extremes. As Charles Dickens observed in an 1846 Household Words article, "We hang men for their crimes, then make stationery of their skins, and call it justice. One wonders who the true barbarians are." The Victorian medical establishment's relationship with human skin went far beyond the occasional criminal binding. It formed a hidden backbone of anatomical education. In the dissection theatres of London teaching hospitals, where the line between scientific inquiry and ghoulish exploitation blurred daily, physicians developed systematic methods for transforming patients into pedagogical tools. St. Bartholomew's Hospital's 1837 Register of Specimens reveals the industrial scale of this practice. Over a single winter anatomy season, surgeons preserved 48 cases of syphilitic lesions on genital skin mounts, 23 demonstration sheets showing psoriasis progression, and 17 tattooed sections for studying ink migration. The most coveted were consumption skins, pulmonary tuberculosis cases preserved to show cavity formations. A letter from pioneering pathologist Sir James Paget to a colleague in 1852 boasts of acquiring a perfect phthisis pelt from a Welsh miner's cadaver, the apical cavities showing like moth holes in parchment. These weren't abstract medical curiosities, but intimate violations. The case of John Horwood, a teenage murderer dissected in Bristol in 1821, illustrates the practice's ethical vacuum. After public dissection, his skin was tanned into a pocketbook used to store autopsy notes about his own body. The object's inscription chillingly notes, "This book bound in the skin of its subject." Newly uncovered workhouse records show how the poor became raw material. At Liverpool's Brownlow Hill Infirmary, a standing order from 1841 to 1865 required the skin of all unclaimed cadavers between ages of 15 to 40 be preserved, excluding facial regions. The resulting educational leather was distributed to medical schools, with invoices showing charges of 2 shillings per square foot. The darkest revelations come from St. Thomas's Hospital's recently rediscovered Dermatological Atlas project. Under the direction of Dr. Erasmus Wilson, teams created hundreds of skin-mounted disease illustrations. Patient consent was non-existent. A marginal note on a leprosy specimen reads, "Taken from Irish female F. Connolly, who objected until chloroformed for amputation." Modern forensic analysis has exposed even more disturbing details. DNA testing on 30 presumed animal skin medical models at the Gordon Museum revealed 22 were human. One obstetrics teaching aid, long catalogued as vellum, was found to contain a complete female torso skin, carefully split and mounted to demonstrate pregnancy stretching. The practice wasn't limited to medicine. Wealthy collectors commissioned souvenir skins from famous autopsies. When the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, died in 1890, at least 3 physicians privately preserved sections of his distinctive thickened skin. A letter from surgeon Frederick Trevis to a colleague mentions having secured a fine piece of the dorsal region suitable for framing. Why did this persist? Victorian medicine operated in a moral grey zone where the ends justified horrific means. As surgeon Sir Jonathan Hutchinson wrote in his 1884 memoir, "What the poor gave in flesh, the rich repaid in health, a fair transaction." Only with the 1891 Anatomy Act's consent clauses did the skin trade decline, but its legacy remains literally embedded in medical institutions. The Wellcome Collection's recent audit identified 74 human skin artifacts in its holdings, most undocumented. The Victorian cult of mourning reached its most unsettling zenith, not in jet-black jewellery or post-mortem photography, but in the preservation of human skin as intimate keepsakes. This practice, existing in the shadowy intersection between devotion and horror, transformed grief into something tangible. Quite literally. When poet Edward Russell succumbed to consumption in 1879, his widow commissioned a singular memorial. A folio of his love poems, bound in skin taken from his chest. The binder's receipt, preserved in the Bodleian Library's archives, specifies the material was procured during the autopsy, with the notation 16 square inches of dermis, anterior thorax, free of tubercular lesions. This was no isolated eccentricity, but part of a widespread phenomenon where human skin became the ultimate sentimental relic. The process was disturbingly methodical. Undertakers' ledgers from the period reveal specialized services for memorial epidermis preservation, typically priced between 2 and 5 guineas depending on the area harvested. The skin was tanned using a secretive process involving oak gall and alum, resulting in a supple material that could be tooled like fine leather. London's Journal of Mourning Practices published detailed instructions in 1863 for home preservation. advising bereaved families to take the skin from the inner arm or flank, areas naturally protected from sun and thus of even texture. The most common artifacts were memory books, small albums where locks of hair and skin swatches were arranged alongside pressed flowers and deathbed sketches. The Victoria and Albert Museum holds a particularly poignant example from 1854, containing a 4-inch square of a child's skin, its surface faintly freckled, stitched to a page inscribed, "Dear Henry's covering, taken this the 12th of June as he entered God's care." Recent multispectral analysis revealed the book's binding itself incorporates epidermal layers from multiple family members, creating a literal family tree of flesh. Wealthier Victorians took the practice further. The archives of Jay's Mourning Warehouse, London's premier grief emporium, include orders for skin-reinforced mourning gloves, where the palmar surface was lined with thin strips of a deceased loved one's epidermis. A surviving pair at the Museum of London, dating to 1872, bears the embossed monogram of the original wearer, a widow who had them crafted from her husband's back skin. Correspondence from the period suggests such items were worn against bare flesh during mourning periods to maintain physical connection. The most technologically advanced and unsettling manifestation was the dermographic portrait, a brief but popular 1870s innovation where photographs were chemically transferred onto prepared human skin. The process, patented by Dr. Alfred Swain Taylor in 1874, involved floating albumin prints on a bath of glycerin and silver nitrate before pressing them onto specially tanned epidermal sheets. The National Science and Media Museum holds 17 examples, including a haunting portrait of a naval officer printed on skin allegedly taken from his own thigh after an amputation. This trade flourished because it answered a deep psychological need in Victorian society. In an era when high mortality rates meant constant bereavement, physical relics provided tangible connections to the departed. A grieving mother might find solace in running her fingers over a book bound in her child's skin, just as we might revisit old voicemails today. The difference, of course, was the irreversible bodily violation required to create such mementos. The practice began declining in the 1880s, not due to moral qualms, but technological progress. As photographic reproduction improved and cremation gained acceptance, the demand for physical relics diminished. The last known commercial skin binding was executed in 1901 by London bookbinder Joseph Zaehnsdorff for an eccentric aristocrat who willed his own epidermis for the purpose. The volume, a collection of Schopenhauer's essays, now resides in a private collection. Modern conservation efforts have uncovered hundreds more examples than previously suspected. Ultraviolet fluorescence imaging at the Wellcome Collection identified 37 mislabeled skin artifacts, including a set of playing cards made from the skin of a single donor, likely a convicted gambler whose family paid for this posthumous humiliation. Each discovery forces institutions to confront difficult questions about display and restitution in exhibits that literally objectify human remains. What makes these artifacts so profoundly unsettling today is not just their macabre nature, but the realization of how easily cultural norms can transform loving remembrance into something grotesque. The Victorian skin souvenirs hold up a dark mirror to our own mortality rituals, how we preserve ashes in glass ornaments or transform loved ones' DNA into memorial diamonds. The materials may change, but the desperate human urge to cheat oblivion through physical remnants remains hauntingly constant. Beneath the veneer of respectability in Victorian London's manufacturing districts thrived an industry never mentioned in civic pride pamphlets, the mass production of human leather. What began as ad hoc preservation by individual anatomists had, by the 1850s, evolved into a streamlined commercial operation, supplying tanned human skin to bookbinders, medical schools, and even luxury goods manufacturers. The epicenter was a cluster of tanneries along Bermondsey's Tanner Street, where the distinctive stench of curing hides masked a darker truth. Parish workhouse records show contracts with establishments like H. Grimshaw and Sons, leather factors, specifying the processing of all available integument from unclaimed deceased. The 1861 industrial census lists 17 Bermondsey businesses with suspiciously vague classifications like specialty leather finishing, operations now believed to have handled human material. The production process was chillingly efficient. Cadavers from workhouses and prisons arrived at receiving docks before dawn. Skinning occurred in dedicated chambers where butchers' tools were modified for anatomical precision. Rounded knives to avoid nicking the dermis, specially curved scissors for delicate areas. A trade manual from 1872 details the grading system. Prime skin came from the back and thighs of young adults, standard from limbs and torso, while utility grade included patchwork pieces from the elderly or diseased. Tannery ledgers reveal staggering volumes. The now demolished Albion Tan Works processed over 900 human skins between 1853 and 1867, according to its surviving daybooks. Their largest single order came in 1864, when St. Thomas's Hospital commissioned 200 square feet of prepared dermis for surgical demonstration sheets at a cost of £85. The material found diverse applications beyond books and medical specimens. Cordwainers used thin memorial leather for mourning shoes. A pair in the Northampton Shoe Museum has been confirmed through proteomic testing to incorporate human skin insole linings. Upholsterers advertised specialty coverings for mourning jewelry boxes, while a Chelsea workshop produced human skin waistcoats for wealthy clients wanting the ultimate memento mori. Quality control was exacting. The London Medical Journal published detailed grading criteria in 1868. Ideal specimens showed uniform thickness of 1/16 inch, minimal hair follicles, and no subcutaneous fat residues. Premium prices were paid for tattooed skin, with naval motifs particularly prized. A full sailor's backpiece could fetch £10 at auction. Distribution networks spanned the empire. Calcutta's Medical College records show annual shipments of prepared anatomical leather from London throughout the 1860s. A shocking 1875 customs seizure in Boston revealed a crate labelled art supplies containing 47 framed skin sections destined for a private collector. The industry's dirty secret was its reliance on society's most vulnerable. Workhouse infirmaries developed covert harvesting systems. Morgue attendants received bonuses per usable skin, leading to widespread abuse. An 1883 Lancet investigation found pauper corpses at Liverpool workhouse routinely missing skin regardless of cause of death, with false, contagious disease labels used to explain the mutilations to families. What finally ended the trade wasn't ethics, but economics. The development of celluloid and other early plastics in the 1880s provided cheaper alternatives for medical models and bookbinding. The last documented commercial human tannery closed in 1891, its final ledger entry reading, 12 calfskins, 3 goats, to be finished Friday. Modern archaeology continues uncovering this industrial legacy. Ground-penetrating radar at former tannery sites reveals waste pits containing thousands of bone fragments with distinctive knife marks indicating flaying. A 2022 study published in the Journal of Archaeological Science analyzed residue in Bermondsey soil samples, finding abnormally high concentrations of alum and human keratin proteins consistent with large-scale skin processing. The factories of flesh represent perhaps the darkest intersection of Victorian industrial ingenuity and moral blindness. In an age that prided itself on progress, an entire manufacturing sector operated on the principle that some people's bodies were raw material rather than sacred remains. The expansion of the British Empire provided Victorian skin collectors with new frontiers of exploitation, where racial pseudoscience and colonial power dynamics created a grotesque market for what anatomists termed ethnographic dermatology. As medical schools clamored for comparative specimens, the bodies of indigenous peoples became commodified on an industrial scale, their skins transformed into teaching aids and morbid curiosities. The trade followed imperial supply lines. Military surgeons stationed in Africa, India, and the Pacific were instructed in War Office circular to preserve by salting or drying any native skins, showing singular markings or pathologies. A grisly cottage industry emerged at colonial outposts. In Cape Town, the Grahamstown Medical Depot processed over 300 Khoisan skins between 1845 and 1860, shipping them to London packed in barrels of brine. Calcutta's Presidency General Hospital maintained a dermatological museum where flayed Rajput warriors' tattoos were displayed as studies in native ornamentation. Racial hierarchies dictated market value. Auction catalogues from the period show Maori facial tattoos commanded premiums up to £20 per square inch, while Aboriginal Australian skins were classified as inferior grade due to their darker pigmentation, obscuring anatomical details. The most sought after were Bushman skins from southern Africa, their perceived rarity driving prices higher than the finest Moroccan leather. A particularly disturbing 1857 invoice from the London Anthropological Society specifies payment of 35 guineas for one complete Hottentot female integument, including mammary appendages. This colonial skin trade operated under a veneer of scientific legitimacy. The Royal College of Surgeons' 1861 Catalogue of Comparative Anatomy lists 487 human skin specimens organized by ethnicity, with detailed notes on each group's purported biological characteristics. Dr. Robert Knox's influential 1850 work, The Races of Men, included lithographs printed on actual skin samples, a practice he defended as providing tactile verification of racial truths. Missionary networks became unwitting procurement channels. Letters from Reverend Frederick Bellamy in New Zealand describe trading blankets for marked Maori skins with postscript instructions for optimal preservation. The subject should be flayed immediately after death, the epidermis scraped with a mussel shell, then stretched on a Rimu wood frame. Such shipments often bypassed customs as religious artifacts. The trade's brutality was occasionally exposed. An 1874 scandal erupted when Parliament learned that skins of executed Indian rebels from the 1857 uprising were being sold as souvenirs. The Illustrated London News published a now infamous engraving showing a British officer examining a flayed sepoy skin at Cawnpore, its folds still bearing sword cuts from the execution. Public outrage temporarily curbed the practice, but loopholes persisted. Colonial surgeons simply reclassified orders as medical specimens. Ironically, the abolition of slavery exacerbated domestic skin harvesting. With the end of African corpse imports after 1833, anatomists turned to England's poor. Workhouse infirmaries became de facto skin farms, their unclaimed dead processed at tanneries like London's notorious Albion Works. A surviving 1841 ledger from Liverpool Brownlow Hill Workhouse records 742 skins harvested over 3 years, each categorized by age, sex, and skin tone, using the same racial taxonomy applied to colonial specimens. The decline came through technological change rather than moral reckoning. By the 1880s, gelatin-based anatomical leather could mimic human skin's properties without the ethical complications. The last known colonial skin shipment arrived at the Royal College of Surgeons in 1898. A tattooed Maori chief's preserved face, now held in storage under strict access restrictions. Modern museums grapple with this legacy. The 2021 Human Remains in Collections audit identified over 3,000 epidermal specimens in UK institutions, many acquired under dubious circumstances. While some have been repatriated, like the 2004 return of 35 Aboriginal skins to Australia, most remain in limbo, too culturally sensitive to display, but too historically significant to destroy. The transformation of human skin into durable leather required innovations that pushed Victorian industrial chemistry to its macabre limits. What began as crude medieval preservation methods evolved into a precise science, with specialized techniques for different applications, from delicate bookbinding vellum to sturdy anatomical demonstration sheets. The process began immediately after death. Dr. Jonathan Goddard's 1847 Manual of Anatomical Preservation specifies a 3-hour window for optimal skin removal, advising the subject should be fresh but cooled, like game birds for plucking. Special tools were developed, rounded scalpels to avoid piercing the dermis, copper alloy scissors resistant to bodily fluids, and curved needles for stitching excision sites closed before burial. Salting was the first critical step. Workhouse records show inmates were paid 6pence per corpse to rub salt mixtures into the inner skin surface, drawing out moisture while preventing bacterial growth. The 1851 Great Exhibition featured an improved salting barrel from Leeds Tannery, W&J Richardson, its lead lining ensuring even curing, though the demonstration discreetly used pigskin. Tanning solutions became fiercely guarded trade secrets. Analysis of residue on surviving specimens reveals 3 main approaches. Vegetable tanning using oak gall and sumac produced a flexible, light-colored leather ideal for bookbinding. The Bodleian Library's conservation team recently identified this method on their anthropodermic copy of Roman poet Persius's Satires, its pages still supple after 160 years. Alum Toring created the white, parchment-like finish preferred for medical specimens. St. Bartholomew's Hospital archives contain recipes specifying 2 pounds of Albanian alum per square yard of skin, producing material stable enough for surgical practice sutures. Oil tanning with cod liver oil and beeswax yielded the durable black anatomical leather used for dissection kits and specimen bags. The Victorian obsession with classification extended to skin grading. The London Leather Sellers Company, 1864 regulations, established 9 quality tiers, from prime ecclesiastical down to workhouse utility grade. Finishing techniques were equally sophisticated. Gold beater's skin, the ultra-thin membrane used for gilding, was produced from infant foreskins at specialist workshops like London's Savory and Moore. Account books show they processed over 3,000 between 1850 and 1875, supplying bookbinders and watchmakers. For luxury items, tanners employed perfumed curing, steeping skins in lavender and rosewater to mask the lingering animal scent noted in contemporary letters as reminiscent of a butcher's shop in high summer. The industry's technological apex came with dermography, printing directly on human skin. Decline came through competing technologies. By 1885, German-developed Kunstleder could mimic human skin's properties at 1/10 the cost. Synchrotron radiation analysis at the Diamond Light Source facility revealed Victorian tanners achieved collagen fiber alignment surpassing modern leathers. Yet this innovation served what we now recognize as profound ethical violations, a reminder that technological progress untempered by morality can produce horrors as readily as wonders.